Labour promised not to raise taxes on working people, but what is a working person?
What is a working person?
Well, a working person...
Simon Cowell?
Well, a working person is someone who works their living...
I've got that.
And uses our public services. The person I have in mind...
Simon Cowell.
The person I have in my mind, Nick, when I say working people, is people who earn their living, rely on our services and don't really have the ability to write a cheque when they get into trouble. So the sort of people I'm meeting pretty well every day now.
Oh, that clears it up now, doesn't it? Not. Look, even before I heard this, I didn't trust them for a minute. And after hearing it, I knew that, frankly, it was impossible not to raise taxes on working people, especially by that definition, because that's where the tax revenue comes from, which begs the question, how will Labour raise the money for all these crazy investment schemes like, for example, pylons? Let's take a look at some of Labour's plans. Now, the first one they told us about was a VAT raid on private schools, which they are planning to implement in January, mid-school year, which is always unwise, and already the collateral damage is being felt. They plan to raise about 1.6 billion, which is a drop in the ocean, so they could pay for 6,500 more teachers. That's 0.3 of a teacher per school. So it's all a bit silly. Only it's becoming clear they won't raise that because unlike with raising income tax, where the amount is predictable as the variables, that's things you can't control, aren't changing dramatically, their calculations rely on parents keeping their kids in private education. Otherwise, it becomes a law of diminishing returns. And unfortunately for them, parents are doing just that. And now it transpires that because of a loophole in this plan, Eton, which is the exact private school they appear to despise when they crafted this ludicrous policy, will benefit. Here's a text, here's a message from Bridget Phillipson, which is something she wrote on X. She said, "Our state schools need teachers more than private schools need embossed stationery. Our children need mental health support more than private schools need new pools. Our students need careers advice more than private schools need AstroTurf pitches." What a thing to say. So to hell with the kids at private schools. Talk about the politics of envy. Most parents sending their kids to these schools do so an incredible sacrifice, and many have kids with special needs. Ironically, Bridget's plan, the VAT raid, will mean that Eton will be able to claim back £4.8 million due to a loophole which will enable them to claw back 10 years of backdated VAT that they paid on capital expenditures. That things like, for example, boarding houses and a swimming pool. So head teachers of small independent schools, which are the majority who do not have the outlay to benefit from the clause, describe the findings as outrageous and horrifying. In fact, Labour's own MP, Rachel Reeves, accused her party of creating further inequalities. She said, "Schools who have the most resources are going to be able to cushion the blow. Is getting a huge handout from the government. It is just wrong and it needs to be addressed." And when she said that, she was talking about Eton. Exactly. From January the 1st, once private schools become VAT paying, they'll all be able to claim it. And Labour also pledged not to increase national insurance, although rumours are that they may raise it on employers. So kind of redefining what they meant. And it also seems that Reeves is preparing a tax triple whammy, a budget raid that breaks manifesto pledges and targets fuel duty, inheritance tax and freezes income tax thresholds. And on Friday, Employment Minister Alison McGovern came up with her plan to get people back into work, but she couldn't answer how many vacancies there were.
What's the current level of vacancies, Minister?
I think they've recently announced it. Is it not about 1.8 million, something like that?
Well, you're the Employment Minister, aren't you? You're talking about people getting into jobs and job opportunities. So what are the level of vacancies at the moment?
It's just above the number of unemployed people. We want to create better jobs in places that don't have enough good jobs.
Yes, but what is the number of vacancies currently?
I think, forgive me, it was just there was just an update recently, and it's just above the number of unemployed people that we have. It's around just over. So we have about 1.5 million people.
You don't know.
Who are unemployed.
So you're launching an initiative to get people back into work, and you don't know how many vacancies there are currently. Do you not think you should know that figure?
Forgive me.
It's 841,000. Let's end it there. But I do think possibly that is a number that you should know.
I mean, how embarrassing. I get the sense that Labour don't know what they're doing. Do you? So to discuss my niggle, I'm joined by former Chief Economist at the Cabinet Office, Professor Jonathan Portes. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me. Now, I want to ask you, firstly, what are your thoughts on the potential plans to raise VAT on private schools to raise money for state education?
Well, as you said, it's not a huge amount of money and it won't pay for a huge amount. It will only be a marginal contribution to improving publicly funded education. So you're right there. But frankly, this is just a tax break for mostly rich people sending their kids to private school, and it's long overdue that they ended it. She probably should have gone somewhat further. But the idea that it won't raise money, I'm afraid, is almost certainly wrong. We have quite a bit of analysis on this, and the evidence suggests that the number of people leaving private schools is unlikely to be that great, because we've had quite large increases in fees over the last 10 years, and that hasn't led to people leaving. And of course, while some people, as you said, there are people who struggle to put their kids in private schools, but the vast majority of people who send their kids to private schools can absolutely afford to pay considerably more.
Really? Where do you get that information from, just out of interest, that the vast majority of people sending their kids to private schools can afford to pay a lot more?
That was in the IFS analysis, which also concluded that the number of people who were likely to pull their kids out of private school was relatively small, a small percentage. But of course, you need, given the average fees at private schools, you need to be on a pretty high salary to be able to send your kid to private school, unless you're one of the relatively few who are lucky enough to get some sort of bursary. And remember, those are relatively few. But, private schools in this country, that's not true in every country, are basically for the rich, and the VAT exemption for private schools was a tax break for the rich. So that, I think, is entirely justified.
But you could argue these parents are actually paying twice, because they pay tax for kids in the state education system, and then they're paying for their own children. So it's not really a tax break. And then if you're saying it's a tax break, then that becomes a tax break in itself. Because on the 1st of January, as I said in my niggle, Eton will be able to claim back historic VAT going back 10 years, as will all of those institutions. So won't the government just be losing money?
I think that is an interesting point. I suspect that there will be measures to deal with that. I think that's I suspect, certainly it's beyond, I suspect, either of our knowledge of exactly how the VAT system and how indeed the new regulations will be introduced. But I agree that would be very unfortunate and undesirable, and I certainly hope the government will ensure that that's not actually what happens.
Yeah, but you see, that's the thing. When you come up with policies, and then you start to have to backtrack when you realise of the potholes in the policy. Could it end up that they don't make any money out of this at all? I mean, the objective was to raise money for these teachers. Correct. And then to put it into another pot to help state education. But if in the end what you're doing doesn't do that, then what's the point?
As I say, with the analysis we have from the IFS, the people who've looked at this in some detail, concludes that it is, while it's uncertain how much it will make, it will certainly make money. So I think that's just a hypothetical we don't particularly need to worry about. Of course, it's true with lots of tax increases that you're not, and you said exactly what you're going to get from income tax. Of course, that's not quite true, right? You put up income tax and people's incomes may change.
Yes, but not
you make the best estimate you can of the impact of the tax change you're making. And the best estimates we have are that this will raise a significant, not, as you say, a huge, but a significant sum of money, which can be put back into the state education system. And on balance, that's a good thing. So that, I think, is probably the one of the more obvious and easier things about this budget, which, of course, has lots of other much more difficult choices.
And what about the national insurance? Now, we're hearing rumours that they may well raise national insurance, but they'll charge it to the employers. So apparently these people aren't working people, as it were.
Well, I think that is definitely a sleight of hand, frankly. Of course, if it's charged to the employers, then it is indeed paid by the employers. It's paid by the business, not by the person. But over the long run, the incidence of this tax, as economists say, is likely to be on working people and on salaries. In other words, salaries in future will probably go up by somewhat less because employers will have somewhat less to pay. Now, I think we can understand why they're doing this. The previous Conservative government completely irresponsibly decided to crash the place on their way out by cutting national insurance by 2% in the April budget. That was, I think, pretty much every economist agrees, was a wholly irresponsible, deeply damaging move. And essentially, what Labour is trying to do is sort of to reverse that by the back door. So I think from an economic point of view, it makes a certain amount of sense. I think we also agree that they could have been a lot more upfront much earlier about the need to reverse that move.
And what about freezing thresholds? Because obviously you're in fiscal drag territory, which is not great. It's pretty much a tax in the end.
That's right. It would be continuing the tax increases that the previous government froze the tax thresholds to raise money through fiscal drag. And of course we have no confirmation, this is something which I think fairly clearly is a tax increase on working people. I don't think there's any serious doubt about that. And is probably not the best way of raising taxes in my view, but they've somewhat boxed themselves in. I mean, the big picture is, unfortunately, that if you want to end austerity, reverse the damage that's been done to our public services, and at the same time to be fiscally responsible, then taxes have to go up. We knew that before the election. Economists were saying it. It's unfortunate that the political parties chose to essentially pretend this issue wasn't there.
All right, listen, Professor Jonathan Portes, thank you so much.